John Dewey lived 1859 to 1952. Now, here's what I write. The most influential education guru in American history was John Dewey, a Fabian socialist. Wait a minute, let's stop right there. A Fabian socialist. Why is that important? Well, Fabian socialism was started in London in the mid-1800s. What's a Fabian socialist? A Fabian socialist wants socialism by evolution, not revolution. A Fabian socialist wants socialism by evolution, not revolution. Over time. Remember the Fabian window created by George Bernard Shaw in 1910 that includes two men banging on a hot earth that's on fire. They're holding it, one with a pair of tongs, the other they're banging on it with anvils, and at the top of the Fabian window created by Fabian socialist George Bernard Shaw in 1910, it says, remold it near to the harsh desire. Remold the earth. In a world crisis, the world's on fire, and you can use that crisis to do the things you could otherwise never do, to get the people to go along with what they would never go along with. And we know that above the burning globe is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, these are your Fabian socialists. John Maynard Keynes, one of the 21 radicals ruling America from the grave that we'll look at in the coming weeks, was a Fabian socialist whose particular depravity was the molestation of little boys. Fabians are all about government, but they tend to want to mix socialism with capitalism. Socialism with capitalism. They're called Fabian socialists. They want world government. They want socialism by evolution, not revolution, over time. And they'll use religion to get it done. People that don't belong to the Fabian Socialist Society, that believe in these ideas, we usually call them communitarians. So going back to our slide, we see that John Dewey was a Fabian socialist. He is signer of the Humanist Manifesto 1 and a founding member of the American Civil Liberties Union and president of the League for Industrial Democracy. Listen now, the American counterpart of the British Fabian Society. So folks, John Dewey helped start the American counterpart to the British Fabian Society. Now, the Fabian Society ended up giving birth to the Labor Party. The Labor Party gave us who? Prime Minister Tony Blair. Prime Minister Tony Blair is now doing what? Running the Blair Foundation, trying to bring the religions of the world together as one and talking about a one world religious system. So John Dewey brought the British counterpart of the Fabian Society to America through the American League for Industrial Democracy. By the way, as we just saw, John Dewey helped to found the American Civil Liberties Union, founded by Roger Baldwin, an outright communist. He's one of the 21 radicals we're going to look at what is the worldview and goal of the American Civil Liberties Union, again, in coming weeks. But getting an idea of the influence of John Dewey. Now, after we're done looking at John Dewey, we're going to quickly move in and look at the Frankfurt School. But you need to understand, John Dewey is who brought the Frankfurt School to America in 1933. John Dewey. John Dewey is a very influential guy, the father of modern education, signed the Humanist Manifesto 1, helped start the American Civil Liberties Union, helped start the League for Industrial Democracy, the American counterpart to the British Fabian Socialist Society. He brought the cultural Marxist, the Frankfurt School here to America in 1933. John Dewey accomplished a great deal, and yet he's called the father of modern education in America. In 1928, he traveled to Russia to help implement the Karl Marx system of education and then returned to teach at Columbia University as the head of that university's Department of Education. Dewey supported the upstart Socialist Society in America while also being an honorary president of the National Education Association. But notice he traveled to Russia in 1928 to help implement the Karl Marx way of education. Then he comes back here to America, becomes the father of modern education. And as we'll see, John Dewey was not about education. John Dewey was about socialization. John Dewey was about socialism. John Dewey was about using the power of education to be an instrument for bringing about progressive socialist, little socialists. Back to our slides. Dewey promoted secular humanism in his book, A Common Faith, and was the leading force behind bringing a group of German intellectuals from the Frankfurt School to America. The Frankfurt School promulgated the worldview of Friedrich Nietzsche, and with the arrival of the school's founders in 1933, they set about to implement cultural Marxism in every area of American life under the guise of political correctness. Notice what we just did there. We just hooked Friedrich Nietzsche, who we just got done talking about, to John Dewey, to the Frankfurt School that we're about to talk about. You see how these people all interact with each other? Their worldviews interact? This is where people talk about, oh, that's conspiracy. Well, in some sense, Satan is the great conspirator, right? He walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But when we talk about this being a conspiracy, by the way, the liberals use that phrase, the open conspiracy, the various other kinds of conspiracies. Many of these guys, by the way, wrote books using the word conspiracy, whether it was the Fabian Socialist or the New Agers. They liked that word conspiracy themselves. Isn't that interesting? But when we write about these things, the progressives and even some useful idiots within evangelicalism say, oh, he's about conspiracy. Well, just notice we just went from Nietzsche to Dewey, and now we're going to the Frankfurt School in a minute, and they're all connected to each other. They don't need to meet in the back rooms, smoke-filled rooms, to plot what they're doing. They just need to read each other's writings, and that's what they do. They just need to embrace each other's worldviews, and that's what they do. They just need to be influenced by the doctrines of demons at the spiritual level. Ephesians 6, a spiritual battle, and that's what they do. So we see the Frankfurt School goal was the destruction of Christianity, the creation of chaos, and then the transition from cultural Marxism to traditional Marxism, i.e. socialism. One of John Dewey's most famous quotations sums up his philosophy. Here's what he wrote, quote, "There is no God and no soul. Hence, there are no needs for the props of traditional religion. With dogma and creed excluded, then the immutable, meaning unchangeable, truth is also dead and buried." Look at that. Truth is dead and buried. What did Nietzsche say? There is no such thing as truth. There is no one morality. Truth and reality are created by man, not by God. And here's John Dewey talking about killing Christianity. Notice all of them hate Christianity. Nietzsche, Dewey, all of them. Kierkegaard, Howse. And as we'll see, all of these people have one thing in common: their hatred of biblical, true Christianity. And for many of them, their desire is to destroy Christianity by corrupting it, by infiltrating it, by undermining it. So he said, with dogma and creed excluded, then immutable truth is also dead and buried. There is no room for fixed natural law or permanent moral absolutes. So John Dewey, Karl Marx, Aldous Huxley, B.F. Skinner, Benjamin Bloom, they were interested in a student's academic achievement only if it would in some way benefit the state. Here's what Dewey went on to write in My Pedagogy, his pedagogic creed. Quote, "I believe the true center of correlation on the school subject is not science, nor literature, nor history, nor geography, but the child's social activities. I believe that the school is primarily a social institution." End quote. In other words, he didn't care about grades. He said the teacher's business is simply to determine on the basis of the larger experience and riper wisdom how the discipline of life shall come to the child. Wait a minute, I thought that would be the job of the parent. But no. John Dewey believed in a Marxist school system. Remember, he went in 1928 to implement Karl Marx's way of education and came back here to America. And under Marx, would you get to just decide whatever you want to do? On the European socialist system, would you just get to decide what it is you want to do? No, the government hands you your job. If you agree with the government, if you agree with the worldview of the government, you are elevated. If you don't, you're demoted. You're digging ditches. You're digging ditches, or you're doing hard labor, busting up rocks. The government decides, because they cannot have people infecting others with their discontent, as Aldous Huxley wrote in his book, Brave New World. Round pegs don't fit in square holes and tend to have dangerous thoughts about the social system and to infect others with that discontent. The teacher's business is simply to determine on the basis of the larger experience and riper wisdom how the discipline of life shall come to the child. All these questions of the grading of the child and his promotion should be determined by reference to the same standard. Examinations are of use only so far as they test the child's fitness for life. So again, it's not about cognitive data, it's about affective data. It's not about reading, writing, and arithmetic, it's about attitudes, values, feelings, and beliefs. We don't really care about the grades, which is why, again, we see the grading system in America has come under criticism. In fact, I even have a report card back in my files from years ago where one school district in Iowa stopped giving students Fs and started giving them NYs for not yet. And they could make up the work until they got a minimum of an 80%. They were not going to be allowed to fail. Nobody could fail. Because again, the purpose wasn't affective objectives or cognitive data. It was affective objectives, attitudes, values, feelings, and beliefs. But how did a lot of that get stopped and slowed up? Moms organized. And that's why you ended up having people elected to office like Michelle Bachmann. Michelle Bachmann would have never become a United States Congresswoman if it was not for the liberal education reform movement. Did you know that? I think she would even agree with that. I knew Michelle Bachmann years ago. She was a mom and a lawyer in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. And when I lived in the Twin Cities, I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, but lived in Washington, D.C. area, and Minneapolis, now the Memphis, Tennessee area. But in the early 90s, Michelle and I would show up and speak at some of the same education meetings. And we would sit right next to each other. I remember sitting right next to her one night in Lake Elmo, Minnesota, right outside of Lake Elmo, Minnesota, at an education forum. She was a mom and an attorney, but she had picked up fighting the education movement. And then she ran for state senate. And she would come to our Worldview weekend in Minneapolis, where we'd have consistently, year after year, 1,800 people. And we would let her come there, and we'd let her have a booth for free. And she was running for state senate, and we would bring her up on the platform and introduce her to everybody. And she won. She became a State Senator Michelle Bachmann. And she really fought what was called profiles of learning, if I remember correctly, in Minnesota. The state education plan of Minnesota, the OBE, outcome-based education, part of the America 2000 school to work plan. And she gained a lot of recognition as fighting that. And a lot of moms worked with her to bring information to the public about how bad this was. And talk radio started talking about it. I'm just talking Minnesota. And then, of course, this was going on with other people in other parts of the country. And then she became a United States Congresswoman. So what I'm saying is, one reason some of this has been slowed up just a little bit, but not much, is because the moms of America got organized, and many of those moms researched this over the kitchen table and the coffee table and the dining room table. And they organized groups and meetings and little nonprofits and Phyllis Schlafly groups, Eagle Forum and Concerned Women for America groups and other groups were formed under different names to fight this education reform movement that largely comes from the worldview, the Marxist worldview of John Dewey, and goes all the way back up to the United Nations and their global education plan, which is all about ending our free market system, not letting young people and their parents have the freedom to help guide them into the career they want to go into, but what the government decides. And again, the purpose of the teacher, John Dewey thought, was to prepare the child for their place in life. And in fact, John Dewey helped start the National Education Association, which actually had an article a few years ago that I write about, where it compared traditional educators to wardens in prisons. They might make great wardens in prisons, or agents for the Federal Bureau of, I think it was the ATF or something, but it was a slap at traditional teachers. They might make great prison wardens, but they damage teaching and the profession by remaining in the school system. Who? Traditional teachers. Why? Because traditional teachers aren't buying into the progressive social engineering change agent concepts of John Dewey. So you see how this is all working together and inculcating them with the worldview of Dewey, inculcating them with the worldview of Nietzsche and postmodernism and their hatred of conservatives, their hatred of Christians, their hatred of the Constitution. Because remember, John Dewey hated the idea of absolute truth. He openly stated, as we read in that quote, of absolute truth in the area even of law. So would we be shocked that John Dewey went on to help found the American Civil Liberties Union, which should have really been called the American Communist Union by communist Roger Baldwin, who we'll look at in this class, in this series, which is not about interpreting the law, but making law. Not about applying the law, but making law. Because the Constitution, they believe, is a living, breathing document. As society evolves, morals evolve, the law evolves, applying Darwinian evolution to the law. That is known as legal positivism. Legal positivism, big word, just simply means applying moral relativism to the law. Darwinian evolution to the law. So you're seeing how these worldviews are all coming together, and now you understand why Michael Foucault, one of the founders of postmodern thought, is being quoted in foreign law. Now you understand why that foreign law is quoted in the United States of America. Now you understand how Michael Foucault and Friedrich Nietzsche and John Dewey and all these ideas are coming together, and you see them working out with all across all the disciplines of life. But how many Americans understand what I'm telling you tonight? Not many. Because as Francis Schaeffer said, they see the world in bits and pieces, but not as the big picture. They don't see the big picture. And so they go along seeing bits and pieces, but not the big picture. They don't understand the worldview war. They don't understand how to destroy these arguments because they still need someone to teach them the basic 101 of worldviews, when they should be teaching someone else, yet they need someone to teach them the very basics. Well, I'm hoping that many have joined us in this class who at one time only knew the basics, and we have started out in the shallow end, and we've started moving into the deep end and understanding the worldview war that's taking place. And if you'll show the screen, here's where we'll pick up next week with the Frankfurt School. Remember, John Dewey helped bring the Frankfurt School to America in 1933, and they are the ones who really kicked the revolution in America into high gear. And this phrase we use a lot, cultural Marxism, these are your cultural Marxists.